Thank you for joining us for the second episode of Your Ghost Stories.
We hope you enjoyed our first episode, which gave you a little insight into us, our personal stories, and what made us start this podcast in the first place.
Today is an exciting episode. After reaching out on social media to see who had some interesting stories to tell us, joining us tonight is a guy called Sam from King's Lynn.
Sam's got his very own unique story, which sounds really freaking spooky. We met Sam a few years back on the music scene through our band. Sam is an awesome photographer, which we've worked with a few times over the years.
We really can't wait to hear more of his story, so we're going to dive right in. Hello, Sam. It's great to have you on board. How have you been?
I've been good. Yeah, not too bad at all. Been looking forward to this a lot, actually.
So we've only heard like a really brief kind of introduction to your story, and all we know is that it's about a haunted bedroom.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could say like a haunted house to be slightly more broad with it, but a lot is based around a singular bedroom, which I can tell you exclusively right now, I'm recording in at this very moment. So we are surrounded by the potential hauntings.
Lots of listeners in.
Oh yeah, hopefully.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
So my name's Sam and I'm a photographer / videographer. I work primarily in music and events, but I do a bit of everything really. I'm a very private believer, I guess, in supernatural stuff.
I was quite surprised when you actually popped up when we put the message on social media that you had an interesting story. I didn't take you as a believer.
Yeah, it's weird. Like I think a skeptic is probably is probably the best description for me, because I believe in aliens and stuff. I'm quite into all that stuff. Ghosts and spirits, I'm a little bit more. I think there's like a scientific explanation for it, but we haven't got there yet. That's kind of where I'm at. But I think a lot of the things I'm going to go into are very psychological and unexplained, and not necessarily ghost related, but some are definitely like straight up, that is a spirit. So yeah, but it's a side of me that I keep quite quiet for the most part. I guess it doesn't really come up in conversation. So when you guys came up as like, anybody have any ghost stories? I was like, yes, sir. Yes, I do.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. I mean, I think that we can both relate as well, that it's just not something you go up to someone and just go, I've had this paranormal experience. It's usually sort of things you keep to yourself until you hear someone start talking about it. Then you're like, no, I've got a story.
Oh, definitely.
And it's very surprising that the people who come through who has a story, you just wouldn't expect it.
Oh my God, yeah.
So I mean, it's cool.
Absolutely.
It's cool. And what you're saying about aliens and cryptids and stuff like that, that's something that me and Jamie both sort of like, we love a good story, like, listen about alien sightings or something like that.
Most of our 10-year relationship is built up around aliens, conspiracies and all sorts.
yeah, like that. What was it? There was one, it was a video of President Obama's security guard, and it's like, it was turning left to right really quickly, and it was like, he's an alien, alien.
I think I've seen this, yeah.
Yeah, I think everyone's seen that one of them.
Yeah, there's some whack stuff. There's some really weird stuff out there, which is just so hard to explain. And I just find it really interesting. Yeah, I mean, what you were saying about how it's like sometimes the people you least expect come out with these ghost stories. For example, I've got a friend who will remain nameless. They're kind of like some of my parents' friends. Some of the most straight-talking people you'll ever meet, really. And then I was just speaking to them one day, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we've had an exorcist round." I was like, "What?" And they're like, "Yeah, our house is like properly messed up." And maybe one day I'll get like the full story from them, because what they told me in brief was really, really interesting. But yeah, so some people just have these mad experiences, and I think they're just really interesting to listen to. And of course, I've had my fair share of my own in my parents' house. So yeah.
I think like you're saying, so many people, quite a lot of people have these experiences, but until you actually, I totally see where people are coming from, when you're a skeptic and, you don't have this belief, because if you've never seen it, you just think, if you've not experienced things that, by the sounds of it, you've experienced and what we've experienced, you do just think, the world is as it seems. But when you have these actual experiences, it just kind of takes you to a place where, and like you're saying, it's so interesting, it's so fascinating, and you just want to dive in deeper and, get to the root cause of why these things may be happening. Like you're saying, it could just be a psychological thing, or it really could be a physical thing here in this world. Like, and that's what's fascinating about it, is none of us actually know.
Definitely.
Yeah,
I think there's something about
definitely makes life.
how people who are very reserved on those topics, I think sometimes the most interesting. And for example, my parents they're not into paranormal stuff at all. But you were there, something weird's happening with this house and always has been. And it was when I was when you guys were writing about this on social media, and I was like, oh, I have some stories. I actually met up with my sister, and we had a proper talk about it, because a lot of my stories are actually from my sister. She's a bit older than me, and she's seen some weird stuff. And my sister's a very logical person as well. But when we get down to just talking about the specifics of this stuff, she's arguably had the more damning experiences and evidence out of the two of us. So it's sorry, you go ahead.
Sorry, man.
No, I was trailing off. You go ahead.
All right, so we're too excited to hear these stories. So if you could set the scene for us, go back to the very start, let us know, where and how this all began. So what was the very first kind of memory of this experience?
Well, I'll set the scene a little bit. So I'm mostly talking about my parents' house, which was built very recently, to be fair. It's built in 1969, so it's quite a new house. And my parents have been living here. Well, it's been the family ever since it was built, but my parents have been living here since 96, 97, about when I was born anyway. And so to start off, the reason we think it might be haunted is that my great-grandmother died in this house. And it wasn't like a unnatural death. It was just old age, very peaceful. But she did die in the room that I'm in right now, actually. So that's kind of a freaky thing, because this was both my sister's and my bedroom at some point. And generally, when we've had people around, like friends, other halves, there's been a very overwhelming idea that something's just kind of off with the house. People have always been like, this house just feels weird. In fact, my current partner, she refuses to walk on the top floor of this house at night, because she doesn't trust the corners. She's just like, there's something weird about the corners of the corridors. And I completely agree. It's creepy. But starting from the very beginning, the earliest experiences probably goes back to my sister. So my sister used to sleepwalk a hell of a lot. And to the point where it was quite disruptive. It was every night, constantly. And some of the weird things that she would do during these sleepwalking spells were just so off the charts. For example, this room where my great-grandmother died used to be completely different before we moved in. The door used to be on the other side of the room. But it wasn't like that when we were living there. Anyway, when my sister was, I don't know, maybe 10 or something, she was sleepwalking, and my parents found her in the corridor outside this room crying because she couldn't find the door handle. But she was next to where the old door used to be, which is really bizarre. And this sleepwalking would go up until she was 18, 19, when she was still living here. So before you got an adult, pretty much. And she was still having these weird experiences. As soon as she moved out, completely stopped. And it's never happened to her since. And she's in her 30s now, which just feels strange. But that's kind of the small end of it, really. That's kind of how it all started. And then as me and my sister grew up, weirder and weirder things started happening. So my sister claims that at some point, I believe in her early teens, when walking out of this bedroom, she came across the figure of a woman in kind of 60s clothing, quite an old woman. And basically, once you kind of realized what she was seeing, the figure floated pretty much directly upwards, vertically. And she claims she was like completely conscious throughout the entire thing. But I think she's pretty convinced that was some kind of supernatural interpretation of our great grandmother. And I think that would arguably be one of the few physical manifestations that we have seen, in terms of something actually taking the shape of something. Hey man, you right?
You're good.
You're right.
Was the story that bad?
Did we lose each other? I'm not sure what happened there.
Maybe
Neither.
it's like maybe it's a spirit from the other side.
Yeah, I mean, my phone's just sitting on my desk. I didn't press it.
That's
Yeah,
really
yeah.
weird.
That
It
is
just hung up in my
strange.
hand. That was really strange.
Yeah, man. Maybe we might leave this in so the listeners can hear the strangeness that happened live.
So yeah, just as we were chatting just then, we just got cut off our phones randomly, and our phone started ringing
Yeah,
again. So,
yeah.
but we're back in action. So yeah, where were we? So we were just saying, Sam, like, you've really set the scene for us here. This sounds incredibly spooky, especially for your sister. I mean, how old was she at the time when all the sleepwalking and stuff started happening?
I believe she was around, I want to say like really young, so probably about 5, maybe younger. I should have really got on the specifics on that, but from what I understand, at least through my perspective, the entire time she was living here, she was sleepwalking. So yeah, it was a very kind of intense thing to be around. It was kind of like this thing, my sister would often be like downstairs first thing in the morning because she would have been just sleepwalking enough all night, all around the house. It was always really, really strange. But
So did she have much recollection, like when she woke up in the morning of, did she know she was sleepwalking,
Oh,
or
no.
did you guys kind of have to tell
nah,
her?
we'd have to tell her. But yeah, so it's obviously after, nearly 15 years of it, she kind of got used to it. But yeah, she would always be completely unaware. But yeah, it's always just like the odd moments when she'd do really weird stuff, like just kind of like sitting up straight in bed. Apparently, her now husband has witnessed her just kind of like sitting straight up in bed and kind of like talking and then just falling back asleep. So she's done some really, really odd stuff. And as I say, like me and her and her husband were talking about it all pretty recently. And when you kind of lay it all out on the table, it's really hard to ignore like the really odd nature of it, and just the fact that it all stopped as soon as she moved out as well.
Yeah, man. That I'm sure my brother won't mind me saying this, but there's something very similar happened to my brother about sleepwalking.
Oh, really?
And I won't go all into his story because this is about your story. But yeah, instances where he's woke up like in the middle of the night in the garden, not knowing like how he got there. Obviously, he's like in his boxers. But So this aspect of sleepwalking, it really is sort of it's quite scary actually. For the individual who is asleep, and also for those around them, because this thing of you're not meant to wake them up or anything like that. And it can be really, really intense.
Definitely. I think on its own, like sleepwalking is like a real scary thing. But when you start mixing in with all the other stuff that I'm going to talk about, it starts to really paint this weird picture. And that, I will say it's weird. It's only ever affected my sister, and she was the one that lived in this room for the most part. I moved into it later, but I never personally experienced any kind of sleep-related weirdness. But actually, no, that's a lie. That's a lie. There is something else. I just glanced over my notes, and something did happen actually semi-recently. But yeah. So do you want me to continue on with the story?
Yeah, please. If you can carry on from I suppose the sleepwalking, how it led on to other things.
Yeah, well, so obviously my parents were dealing with with my sister going on these nightly adventures, as it were. And but my mom has always been very. She's always known exactly what she believes. She doesn't believe in ghosts. She doesn't deal with that. But she's always had stories of the house making the weirdest like noises at night, and classic stories of things going missing and then just turning up like in the middle of the floor kind of thing. Those very kind of niche, but also I think when they're niche stories, but when they're considered everything else, they're all quite creepy. But one of the major things she remembers, and I vaguely remember happening as well, but she brought up to me was during a particularly like significant run of these things going missing and then turning up in random places. We heard like a smash one day. I think we were in the kitchen, and we went to the china cupboard, and random bowls just inside the china cupboard had just exploded. And we had no idea how it happened. I can't fathom how something like that could have happened. It wasn't like anything fell. Everything in there is just kind of like stacked. But it seems like some of them had just kind of just shattered in their own way. And that was really quite odd. Then, as I say, this is when a lot of other weird stuff was happening as well. So from there, we start to kind of go on to more of my personal experiences. And these are some of the weirder ones, I think. And I was debating including this first one because when I was speaking to my sister, my partner about it, just like, nah, that's a boring one. But I think it's important because it was my first proper experience of something happening. So me and my childhood friend, a chap, I won't name him, but I spoke to him like semi-recently. We hadn't spoken in years, but I remembered this thing happening. And I just had to message him because it's like, did this actually happen? And do you remember it? And how do you remember it? And he basically just confirmed everything that I said, which was a bit scary. But we have quite a big garden, quite a big garden surrounding this house. And me and my friend, we must have been about 8 or 9. And we were just like hanging around like in the driveway part of the house. And I can't remember exactly what we were doing. I think we were like on bikes or go-karts or something. And then we just both see completely independently this weird like glowing lights kind of come between two trees which are next to the house. And it went really clearly from right to left. And I remember both completely independently, we just basically screamed. We were so freaked out because it just looked so unearthly. It was white, maybe slightly tinted with some blue, probably about 5 foot, 6 foot in height, and maybe like 2 or 3 foot wide. And it just kind of glided from right to left. And it was the weirdest sensation. And we were so freaked out. We ran inside. I should probably say it was probably about 6 or 7 o'clock at night. It's quite dark. And we just refused to go back out. We were terrified. And yeah, that was like the first proper experience I had. And that's when I started to be like, is there something weird about this house? I think that's long before I knew that like someone had died, and then I don't think I'd really put together any of the clues about like my sister's sleepwalking or anything. So it was, yeah.
Well, how old were you at the time when you saw this glowing light in your garden?
I think about 8 or 9. So I was quite young.
So yeah, it's an age where you like let alone saying something like that, you have no idea what's going on, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We were just like, what is this? And I think I was quite skeptic about his anyway. Like I'd read about ghosts. I found them interesting, but I wasn't like obsessed or anything else. It was just like one of the many things that I had a slight interest in. But yeah, it was just something about that experience really, really stuck with me. And I think probably went on to inform a lot of my my future experiences. But I think something about that as well, because I witnessed it with someone, that made it feel a little bit more real. If I'd seen it on my own, maybe I would have been able to convince myself, oh, it was, just a trick of the light. Maybe I imagined it or whatever. But the fact that two 25-year-olds can still corroborate seeing that, how many years later, it's freaky.
Yeah, it is freaky, but at the same time, you're not going crazy because you've got someone there who can validate
Exactly.
it as well. Yeah. So this streak of light, did it hold like a shape or anything, or is it just like a blurry streak that sort of zoomed across?
The only way I could really describe it is like it was a blob. There wasn't like a human shape to it, but it seemed dense. Like I couldn't see through it. It was almost like someone in like in a blanket, if you get what I mean. Like the classic putting a sheet over your head and being a ghost kind of thing. It was almost like that, but there was something more. There's something a lot brighter about it for sure. It was almost blinding, and yeah, it just seemed to kind of float. I can't really recall if it was on the ground or if it was just kind of like dragging across the ground. It was really strange. I will also say, like, this isn't like a particularly open garden. This isn't particularly near a road or anything. It's not. There is no obvious way where this light could have come from or could have gone into the garden. It's a very dark area, and I've never seen anything like it since. And I spent a not insignificant amount of time at this property, having grown up here, and I've never seen anything like it before or since. Yeah. I also remember my mother being very annoyed that we came in screaming. She was just like, "What are you screaming about? What's all this noise about?" I was just like, "I just saw the undead." So it was
To be
It reminds me of the time when I was about 11 years old and shouldn't have been watching The Exorcist, but me and my friend decided to watch The Exorcist, and then it got to the scene where she's possessed in her bed and doing something she shouldn't be doing with a cross, and me and my friend just freaked out and ran downstairs crying our eyes out.
Oh man, I was gonna say you actually reminded me of something not spooky related, not ghost related, but your story there just reminded me of something that happened to me when I was like 19, and it was one of the scariest things ever. Me and my partner at the time, we had like a double date with one of my best mates, who was actually one of these later stories, and we're kind of like in like this caravan thing. It was on their property. And we were watching like some of the scariest movies I've ever seen. I can't remember what they were now. But it must have been like 1 o'clock in the morning. And we just watched this really freaky, like serial killer kind of film. And just as the credits were rolling, the power cut out and we were just like in absolute darkness and silence. And it was the scariest thing. God,
oh, man, the timing of that. Eh?
yeah, the timing was just bizarre.
Perfect, almost.
Just waiting for Jason to come in to smash the door down with a machete.
Exactly. I just remember being absolutely frozen in fear. God. But yeah, I completely forgot about that until you just mentioned that. So yeah, I guess the next major freaky series of events that I experienced, they come much later in my life, actually. I think by this point I was probably about 15 or 16. And these happen, this one in particular happens in the spare room in this house, which used to be my bedroom at the time. And it is next door to this room. But it is one of for me personally, is the scariest one that I've experienced because there was like a genuine sense of danger. But I had a bed that was kind of like slightly raised off the ground kind of thing. Like it was a bit taller than your average bed. And this was like,
just floating in the middle of the room.
Floating, just that.
Sounds like a hammock.
It wasn't quite a hammock, but it was just kind of like, I want to say like 4 foot off the ground kind of thing. It was almost like a bunk bed if it wasn't a bunk bed. Essentially, one night, I remember it was the middle of summer, got into bed, turned off the lights and everything. And it was probably about 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning, I woke up, which is actually quite rare for me. I don't tend to wake up in the middle of the night. And I realized it's because I could hear something in my room. And the sound, the only way I can describe the sound is it was like a massive dog snoring, but like that kind of like growling sound. And I should say at the time, no dogs or animals in the house, in the family. But I could hear this thing at the foot of my bed, like on the floor. And it was so surreal because I had this absolute fear that I was going to like move and wake it up. And I had no idea really what it was. But it was like so loud you could kind of like hear it reverberating off the walls. And I seem to remember like trying to, I think, text my parents or something to tell them about it. And at some point, I just kind of fell asleep again. So I remember I really wanted to get out of the bed, but I was worried that if I like stepped on the ground or something and there was something like a wild animal in my room, it would just like attack me. So at some point, I just managed to get back off to sleep. I was like, I'll deal with it in the morning. But I believe I also made a recording of it at some point. I swear I have.
Oh, do you still have this?
I should do. I will see if I can find it because I'm not sure if I would have been on iPhone at the time. I might have it backed up because I back up everything because I'm obsessive. So I probably do have it somewhere. If I can find it, I'll send it over. But it was, because I remember I had some proof to my parents that I didn't just dream it. So I must have recorded it because how else would I have done that? Yeah, I must have a recording somewhere. But for like, my parents just like, oh, it must have been something outside. But I know that there was something in that room and there was also no way for it to get out. And in the morning, there was nothing there. And that was very odd for me because I know the fact that when I say that was like the scariest one for me, I think it's because it felt like the most immediate because it just felt so close. With my previous experience with the light just going to the garden, I was probably about, 20 foot away from that. There was some distance there. In this, there was like a very immediate closeness, which, yeah, really freaked me out.
So throughout these experiences that you've had so far, do you get a sense, I know you said this one, you felt a sense of danger, but do you feel like it's kind of an ominous presence, or is it more of, does it make you feel genuinely afraid when these things happen?
I feel like ominous presence is probably the most accurate description. It can make me feel uncomfortable more than threatened, I guess. This one in particular with the weird breathing, I think I felt threatened more at the idea that it could have been something physical, but
like a raccoon.
Yeah, like that kind of thing. Like I think in my head I had it as like it could be like a wild like dog or something. But the fact that there was definitely nothing in there because there's no way it would have been able to get out with my door closed and all that leads me to believe that it must have been something that can make that kind of noise, but can also just disapparate and disappear. So
it's just crazy how, so many people have such similar experiences. I spoke about it on the first episode, but I had a similar experience in my old house. I mean, I won't go into detail about it, but I just walked around the corner to go up the stairs, and right there, in my ears was just this massive growl, like a demonic kind of growl.
Oh, jeez.
There's just no explanation for it, so I completely see where you're coming from.
Yeah.
And it is terrifying, especially when, you can't physically see anything. Nothing's actually there. You're like just left wondering, where did this noise come from? It's terrifying.
No, absolutely. I'm glad that you've kind of had a similar experience. So that makes me feel a little bit better, to be honest, because this is kind of like the outlier with everything else I'm going to talk about, to be honest. This is like the one that kind of, there's nothing else quite like this in the list of stories that I have. And it's, yeah, I think demonic is actually a really good way to describe the sound that I heard. Because it just sounded like massive. It was so loud. It felt like it couldn't have come from anything, smaller than, I don't know, smaller than your standard Vox amplifier, you know, that kind of chunky kind of sound. Yeah, it was really bizarre, really, really bizarre. And that's not the only story I have from that room either. This one actually happens a lot later. In fact, this is probably my most recent story. So I'm going to jump forward in time a little bit and then jump back, because that spare room I had a really odd sleep experience. So I'll throw it in here because I think it maybe ties in with kind of what my sister was experiencing when she was living here. But yeah, like when I must have been 20 at this point, I come back from university and I was staying in the spare room. And I remember I was sleeping like quite badly, I think, probably just some like stress. But essentially what happened was I was asleep / awake. I think the best way to describe it is probably sleep paralysis. In the bed in the spare room. And to paint the scene a little bit, there's a window to the right of the bed. And then to the left of the bed is the door out into the main corridor. And this is maybe my only experience of sleep paralysis, or something very similar. But I witnessed very vividly a figure dressed in all black, with the biggest knife that I think I've ever seen, kind of picking his way through the window, and then he jumps in through the window and marches right to left around the bed, and I follow him with my eyes, and I see him basically reaching for the door handle. At that point, he literally pops out of existence, and I am suddenly definitely 100% awake. So it was one of the most, just, it sent my heart rate absolutely flying. I was covered in cold sweat, but it was so weird because I felt like I saw this figure in real time, and the fact that I could see him pop out of existence, I can only assume I hallucinated it through some kind of sleep paralysis. But it was so uncharacteristically odd for me, in terms of like dreams and stuff. Like I have pretty normal dreams. I never have anything quite like that. And it was the first time I've been in the room in quite a few years as well. Yeah, it's just something about this house and sleeping in it. People have very, very off experiences, it seems.
I mean, real or, whether you hallucinated that or, whether it genuinely was there, all I can say is fuck that.
Yeah, it was so vivid. Like I can see that like perfectly now. And I remember when I woke up from it, I was like playing it over because I was just like, that just looks so real. And like if I had seen that figure like go through that door, I don't think I could have ever been convinced that that was not real, because it just seemed so visually accurate. And the fact that there was no kind of like transition between why she was a dream and me being fully conscious. The guy just popped out of existence, but everything around him was in the same place. So I must have like followed him with my eyes being open, but my brain being asleep, which that just freaks me out. That's just a whole other level of bizarre for me.
There's totally something about, the dream state and the spirit world, from all the stories that I'm sure you've heard as well. There's definitely some kind of connection there with the two worlds.
Definitely. I think there's, as I going back to what I said at the very beginning, I think there must be some kind of scientific explanation for the supernatural and the paranormal, and I think maybe there is some kind of connection there, through like the dream state and sleep. There must be some kind of like no man's land that maybe we don't fully understand yet. And then beyond that, I have two other stories which kind of close off my experiences. But the two of the creepier ones, I think. And they're both relatively recent. So I'd say one is from when I was around 18 or so. So I'm talking like 2015 or so. And at the time I was living in the room that I'm in right now. Um, and essentially, I had like my computer set up. I did a lot of work in here. Um, and I was away from home. I can't remember where I was. I was probably at the pub or a gig, knowing me. Um, and my parents were pretty sure that I was still here and I just had my door closed, which was quite uncharacteristic for me. I used to have the door open when I was here. Um, but they were just kind of like, shouted in, just like, "You're right, anything you need." I think like, just asking if I want anything to eat, if I was going to sort myself out, whatever. Um, and apparently the reason they were pretty convinced I was in this room is because they could hear my computer keyboard very clearly just typing. And when I didn't respond, they got quite concerned because they really respect my privacy, my parents, and they never used to kind of walk in. So they refused to like open the door, but they were like knocking, being like, "Sam, you're right." And apparently they just heard me just typing away quite ferociously on the keyboard. And they were really, really surprised if I walked through the door like an hour later. They're just like, "I thought you were upstairs." And then they told me all about what they'd experienced. And it was really, really bizarre. And maybe feel quite, I don't know, quite exposed to really the fact that something like that was happening in my room when I wasn't there, kind of thing. Um, yeah, that's quite a short one, but it was one of the more, I don't know, indisputable experiences I had, or rather my parents had.
Did it leave any notes on your computer?
It
or was your computer
didn't.
actually in there at the time?
That's the thing, because my computer was like off. It was like locked. So there was nothing on there. But I would say that I did definitely check to see if like any like Word documents have been, or maybe some emails have been sent.
Yeah.
It's when you open your notes and you just see great grandma was it.
Was it just kind of like sent some chain mail or something?
It's crazy. I don't know how you could sit in the room you're in now and retell these stories, because I don't think I'd be able to sit in that room. And just listening to your stories gives me shivers.
Oh, well, I'm glad you're not the only one. It's because it's like, man, so some of the things that we experienced in this house were very strange.
It's interesting that, although your parents might not be strong believers of this kind of stuff, they've actually had an experience that they cannot explain themselves.
Definitely. Like that's the thing. I think it's probably because my parents are very reserved, and I completely respect that decision. But they've definitely between them had their fair share, just like, we can't explain this. And I think my mum in particular just kind of like just tries not to think about it, kind of thing. Because of course, like, it's a family home. She doesn't want to think that it's infestated with the unknown. So I completely understand that. But yeah, it's one of those things, like, as I said at the beginning, multiple people have experienced these things, and that's what makes it really hard to kind of justify and just kind of ignore. And my final story actually involves another person, a new character, who I'm sure he won't mind for his name. His name's Josh. He's one of my best mates, and he's just really cool. And essentially, we met I think we met in college, and I'm trying to remember when this was. This was probably about 2017 or so. So it's probably about 19 or 20. We had been at maybe a gig or something. We'd been out, and he ends up coming back here because driving home was quite far for him. So I was just like, "You can just stay in the spare room." And we ended up coming in this room, which I was living in at the time. And we were both just kind of sat on the bed, and we'd very briefly kind of like talked about creepy stuff. In fact, I think I'd recited some of the stories that I told you today. And I remember really clearly, we were sat on the bed, and the aforementioned computer with the aforementioned keyboard was in the corner. And essentially, we were talking, and then suddenly it just kind of turned itself on, which is really surreal. When that happened, the curtains next to it started kind of like moving. It was almost like, it didn't look like they were being blown. It looked like something had pushed them, if that makes sense. It wasn't kind of a gentle transition. It was quite a sudden transition. Um, and then within maybe 1 or 2 seconds, something, I have no idea what it was. I assume it was like a pen or something, just rolled off the desk. And then slightly further to the right of the room, I had a bunch of lanyards hanging off the door handle, and those just all started rattling. And we both witnesses, this all happened in the space of less than 5 seconds. It was like a transition of things moving at once. And we just both kind of like watched it happen and looked at each other and we're just like, what the hell was that? And I can't explain it. The fact that the computer turned itself on would require quite a lot of physical power. And then just everything else moving in the way that it did was just very surreal.
Wow, Sam, these stories are incredible. It sounds like you need a priest or something around your house.
You'd think, wouldn't you? Like, God, don't know if my parents would ever let that happen though. But yeah, as I say, I've had some freaky stuff happen. And I've spoken to Josh about it since, and he remembers it as clearly as I do. And as I say, it's just the sheer amount of people that have experienced something. And when there's been people experiencing, like more than one person experiencing something happening at one time, that's just weird to me. I feel like you don't see that a lot, or you don't hear about that a lot. Generally, when people recite stories of the unknown or the paranormal, it's like, this thing happened to me, but I don't have anyone to corroborate it. It's my way against yours kind of thing. But I have like, at least 2 experiences. I actually know at least 3 experiences where more than one person could be like, I was there, I saw what happened to, which, I don't know, I feel like it adds up to something, but who am I to say?
I totally understand that. Do you find that there could be long periods of time where there was just no activity? 'Cause especially in the house that I grew up as a kid, there had been many times where there had been activity. There'd been like periods where there was a lot of activity, and it would seem like it would go for a long time where there was like no activity at all, and then something would start like up again, and whether with my brother saw something or my mum saw something or heard something, or one of my many ex-girlfriends sent something. But yeah, do you find that happens?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's been very infrequent, to be honest. We have had periods of time where lots of things have happened in kind of like a small dose, as it were. But for example, I'm trying to think of the most recent thing that I've experienced personally. In fact, anyone in this house has experienced, and I think the most recent thing was probably my sleep paralysis. And that was, God, that's pre-COVID. So it was, yeah, it's quite a while ago. I don't even know, like, I guess, like, if we're talking about the sleepwalking thing, I guess that was quite a constant thing. But even then, if you take that out of the equation, it seems like there can be a couple of years between experiences in this house. So it's very infrequent. And I think that's probably what makes it all the more remarkable when it does happen, because I think every time it has, it's kind of taken us off guard a little bit, and we're just like, oh wow, that was definitely a specific specific experience. Yeah, but I think that's quite a common thing for things to kind of settle down for a long time, and suddenly something kind of jumps out of nowhere and catches you off guard.
One thing that's really stuck to me from your stories is so going back to the start where you said about the door handle used to be on the other side,
Yeah.
and your sister then sleepwalking. Like, how do you explain that? And then, like you say, your sister's sleepwalking and she's confused. Not that she's ever seen the door handle on that side of the room, but I'm sure maybe your great grandma did.
Yeah, that's one of the really weird ones. I didn't actually know about that story until a couple of weeks ago. As I say, my sister and it was my sister, her husband, and my partner. We all just sat down, a couple of drinks, and just kind of talked it over. It's just like, what have we experienced? And I didn't know anything about that one, and that's a really difficult one to explain away. I mean, I think there's some logical explanations for maybe all of these, but when it comes down to all these things happening and being so prevalent and being just so out of the ordinary, an explanation is almost out of the question. You feel like there must be something more going on. But I do agree with that one story about the door handle. That freaked me out a little bit. Because I'm just like, come on, like that's almost bait.
I think like all of us talking tonight, I think, we all have we're quite skeptical with things that happen. I know I am very much so. And I like to, there's got to be a scientific explanation as to why this stuff's happening. But sometimes these things just do happen and they literally have no explanation.
Yeah, definitely. I guess like the one with the keyboard being typed on in my room, that one really throws me off because I can't think of a realistic explanation for that. That just seems very, unless I was like a mouse, I guess, just like climbing over my keyboard. But I don't know. Like I just like to think there was a ghost checking my emails. To be honest, I need a ghost checking my emails. Maybe I'll reply to more. But it's
I think a lot of the time there really is, a reasonable explanation. But when more than one person has this same experience at the same time, understandably, if it's just one person, your mind is very powerful, the brain's very powerful, and your mind can play tricks on you. But yeah, when two people have these experiences, and by the sounds of your experiences, you've had quite a few instances where there's been more than just you. So yeah, it really is freaky and unexplainable.
definitely. I'm glad you agree, honestly, because it makes me feel a lot better about my own crazy mind, really. Because it's just like, it's one of those things I think naturally um, you want to justify. One of my favorite quotes, actually, it's from Sarah Jane Smith of Doctor Who, is "We're only scared of what we don't understand," and I think that's very. I don't know. I think that's a very good quote to live by because I think these experiences are only scary because there's no realistic explanation for them. Um, but hell, maybe one day science will get to a point where we can understand this kind of stuff a little bit more. Maybe there is an explanation out there, or maybe there's not. Maybe it's destined for humanity to never truly, truly understand phenomena like this. But I don't know. I live in hope. I want to believe.
Yeah, I sort of just see it as in my mind I try and like rationalize it as energies, and I sometimes think of like residual energy that's been like left in time, so to speak, because there are many sort of cases of these things happening in the past where someone will have like, I suppose, like a hallucination of something that happened like years and years ago, and there's no way that like, it could have been a hallucination, but it's more like a playback of memory. I mean, for instance, crystals, they can capture memory. That's how we watch DVDs. It literally captures memories on DVDs. So who knows what the world is really, really like. But yeah, it definitely makes life a bit more interesting when these things happen.
Definitely.
But I think it's important not to dwell too much on it as well. In the sense of you can try and in your mind think in a logical way, but sometimes you just have to accept it and move on. Otherwise, you can end up either scaring yourself to death, like any time you see your shadow, you're jumping.
Yeah.
Or you drive yourself crazy.
Definitely. Yeah. It's really interesting, actually, when you mentioned kind of like situations where people have like remembered memories that aren't theirs and were from many years before they were born. Because there's certain cases where people have managed to lead people to bodies and stuff, isn't there? Where, and I find that stuff crazy because there must be some kind of explanation there. There must be something that we haven't quite uncovered yet. I mean, the human mind's crazy, isn't it? Like it's so powerful, and we don't give it enough credit, really. And
Totally agree with you. But going back to our first episode, so I actually had an experience of what I believe to be a reincarnation from myself.
really,
But I won't tell you about it on this episode. You feel free to have a listen to the first episode, and you'll hear my whole experience in its entirety.
nice plug. I like it.
Yeah.
you got to listen to episode one. You got to go from the beginning. You got to go for the prequel.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Reincarnation's fascinating though. Because it's one of those things like there's there's definitely experiences that have, have some kind of real world implications which you can't ignore. And it's, I know, I just find that stuff fascinating. And it all, again, comes down to the human brain, and just how crazily powerful it can be. I mean, if you think about what kind of like, there's certain like hypnotherapies and stuff that can help alleviate, like physical things. I've done hypnotherapy when I was a few years ago when I was looking for the kind of therapist and stuff. I gave hypnotherapy a go, and it's crazy how much that stuff can actually impact you physically. And it's
The brain is very susceptible.
definitely 100%. And who's to say there's forces that we don't yet understand that can plant information, and we've just termed that reincarnation because we don't quite understand it yet. Oh god, I love this stuff. It's been so long since I had an in-depth conversation about this stuff, and I'm having a great time.
We're glad you're having a great time, Sam. You've been an absolutely incredible guest. Like, we're so honored to have spoke to you. You're a great speaker.
Oh, thank you.
And your stories are terrifying yet so interesting at the same time.
I think I've always come across as quite a quiet person. I think a lot of people who know me IRL will agree that I also have just these really weird experiences. So once I get onto a topic that I'm really quite passionate about, God, I can speak for hours. And yeah, I just find this stuff. Yeah, I just find it absolutely fascinating. And thank you for giving me a chance to kind of share it a little bit, because I've never kind of spoken this in depth about it or in like any context like this. Obviously, I so often have a little heart to heart with people and to be like, yo, do you believe in this stuff? Am I alone? But no, it's been fun to kind of get out in the world.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, that's what one of the reasons why we started this podcast is because we have our own interests and our own like experiences in this, but we also want to open it up and just I want to hear people's stories. It's so intriguing, and it just, as you say, when it's a subject that you are all in on, you get so captivated by it.
Definitely. I think there's a shared kind of like, I don't want to say trauma, but there's like when you've experienced something that you really can't explain, there's something quite freeing about being able to talk about it, and just kind of like in the way that Jamie was mentioning how he had heard kind of like that demonic kind of growl, I think he said. That made me feel a lot better about the weird dog sound that I heard when I was 15 or whatever, because I'd never heard anything else. I'd never heard anybody speak about anything like that before. So yeah, we're always learning. We're always sharing.
Well, Sam, you've been truly amazing, and it's a real honor for you to share your stories with us and with hopefully the people that will be listening to this podcast. Which, like we said last episode, it's just Nigel's mum and dad right now. But
Hey, Mum and Dad.
I'm going to get people on this. I'm going to be posting this on Reddit.
oh, that's amazing, man. Yeah, it's been a real pleasure to chat to you, man. And thank you so much. Please do keep us updated if anything does happen. Anything else does happen at your house, then we'd love to hear, and we'll speak about it on the podcast.
You know what? If something else happens, I'm going to call you like straight up. I'm just going to be like, Jamie, get the microphones
with
out
the new
right now.
Ghostbusters. We'll come in our Ghostbusters outfits. Nigel's got one of those little what's it called?
What's it? It's the trap that catches the ghosts. My mind's gone blank what they're actually called, but yeah, the Ghostbusters trap.
We'll be there in our outfits and
knocking on the door at 2 a.m.
We'll resolve this for you.
A slick back hair.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, thanks, man. We'll leave it there and let you get on with your night, and hopefully not have too many more spooky experiences tonight. And now it's all kind of brought to the surface, and it's sitting there right in the front of your brain.
I'm gonna be laying awake, just cold sweats all through the night. My partner's gonna be like, "You're right." Like, I can't do it. I'm just, oh man. Anyway,
Well, you got us on speed dial now.
Fantastic.
Thanks for joining us.
No worries. No, thank you so much, and hopefully see you guys soon.
See you soon, buddy.
We'd just like to thank everybody that has tuned into this episode tonight.
This is only the very start of Your Ghost Stories podcast, so your support means a lot. If you're enjoying listening so far, it would be awesome if you could give us a follow on social media.
You can find us at Your Ghost Stories Podcast on Instagram and Facebook, or you can watch the videos and subscribe to us on YouTube.
If you have any stories or experiences you want to share, the best way to get in touch is at yourghoststoriespodcast@gmail.com.
We can either read your stories out or you can join us for a chat.
We'll see you in the next episode.